Welcome to Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe, where you'll find the unique, the bizarre, and sometimes the haunted. Feel free to look around, peruse the items, and never fear, there's nothing here that bites. Hard anyway. Hello there. So wonderful to see you return to Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe, and today we introduce something special here at Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe, a new feature that we will be doing from time to time. And with this feature, of course, we also have various items that we'll be introducing to you. This one, very interesting indeed. This is what is known as a Ouija board. To the less refined, as we'll find out, it is called a Ouija board. Some call it a spirit board, some call it a talking board, yet others refer to this as a witchboard, a device used for communicating with the spirits long since departing this corporeal world. So let's pull out the kinetoscope as we introduce a new feature here on Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe. Be kind, rewind, Witchboard. So this is a new feature we're going to be doing on Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe from time to time, especially on a week like this where there really wasn't anything new coming out. I came into last weekend and I'm looking to see, what new movies are out? Well, there's no movies at the theaters. There's no movies coming out on streaming. There are no shows that are wrapping up this weekend. So I really came into this week with nothing to talk about, which I don't like that. We came up with this idea for Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe to be a weekly podcast, but then there were times where we just had so much to talk about that I changed it to twice a week we were going to do this. So I'd like to at least get one show in a week, two if we can, more if possible, if the world demands it, as far as there being different things to talk about. But this week I really didn't have much to talk about, so that got me thinking about a promise I made at the beginning of the year that we're going to do more features and do more special shows that weren't necessarily about newer movies or newer TV shows, but talk about some of the old things that I love. We've got some features in the work, and I thought, well, this would be a perfect week to introduce one of the features I've been looking forward to putting out there for you, called Be Kind, Rewind, and kind of playing off the old idea of the video store, those movies that you saw back in the day. In many cases, these are going to be movies that I rented on VHS cassette back in the 80s. Not necessarily all the time, but we're going to take a look with this feature, Be Kind, Rewind. We're going to take a look back at some movies that I watched, once upon a time, and see how they hold up now. And see, on a rewatch, if I enjoy them as much as I enjoyed them then. And I thought a perfect one to do that with is Witchboard, because I saw this back when it first came out on VHS, and I've seen it a couple times since then. I watched it with a group of friends once in the 90s, and then I just rewatched it recently because it's one of those movies that I enjoyed. I loved it back in the 80s when it first came out for various reasons. When I rewatched it in the 90s, I was a little disillusioned with things because I played it for a group of friends that I don't think the movie lived up to the bill of sales I was creating for this. My friends seemed a little bored, but I've always had fond memories of watching Witchboard. Not just the cast, but the story and some of the scares as well. So I thought I'm going to rewatch this and we're going to talk about it. So I thought this was a good movie to kick off this new Be Kind, Rewind segment that we'll be doing from time to time here on Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe. Now, this movie came out in late 1986. It got like a limited run, and then I think later in 87, later in that first quarter of 1987, that's kind of when it got a bigger release, and then of course was released on VHS later that year. But it was written and directed by Kevin Tenney, who at the time, I think he was a film school student, and this was his first screenplay, first movie that he's written based on one of his screenplays. I mean, he's gone on to do other things. He wrote and directed Witchboard 2. He wrote Witchboard 3. He wrote, or at least directed, A Night of the Demon. He's gone on to do some things, but really in recent years, it's been over a decade, I think, since he's done anything. And it's a shame because, just given what he did with that first Witchboard movie, I think there was really a lot of expectation that he might be one of the up-and-coming horror directors out there. And it's also funny because he wrote Witchboard not really being a fan of the horror genre. and it's interesting because he wrote a horror movie that was, for the most part, at least back in I probably watched this when it came out on VHS, probably sometime in the late 87. It was quite scary at that time. I think now we look through things, and especially as horror fans, we're so desensitized by big budget special effects and CG and special effect makeup and work like that we don't appreciate the simpler techniques that are used by some of the older movies. But I think Witchboard really had a lot going for it beyond the scares and beyond the special effects. And we'll kind of talk about that as we reminisce on this movie. So just a brief synopsis of the plot. You have a couple, they've been together for a couple of years, Jim and Linda, played by Todd Allen and Tawny Katane. They're having a party. Linda's former boyfriend and Jim's former best friend is invited to this party, and he introduces them to the Witchboard, this Ouija board. As he will say, it's not pronounced Ouija. That's for the bourgeoisie. Sophisticated circles call it a Ouija board. And I love that. It really establishes him as like some snooty upper crust snob that thinks he's better than everyone else. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But he introduces this Ouija board. Linda becomes addicted to it because she talks to a spirit that tells her that she's going to be pregnant and tells her all the things she wants to hear. Gets her addicted to it and then starts changing her. Then, of course, Jim and Brandon, the former friend and the former boyfriend of Linda, they've got to work together to try and save Linda from this spirit that is causing her trouble. Now, one of the things I found really interesting is how quickly and how well that they set up the relationships and the rules of the Witchboard with this big party that Jim and Linda are having, and Brandon's there, and you establish the characters really quick. Like I said, the Brandon character played by Stephen Nichols is right off the bat, he's the snooty upper crust guy that thinks he's better than everyone else, definitely thinks he's better than Jim. And you get the conflict between Jim and Brandon. You get Jim and Linda's characters and their relationship established. Jim's kind of a rough around the edges, blue collar guy that kind of can come across a little douchey, but it's, I think, more of just a lack of self-esteem. He feels like he's lesser than a guy like Brandon, so he's got to make up for it by egging him on and saying dickish things. But you get the relationship between Jim and Linda right away, and that they do love each other. She loves him and he loves her, and he's just feeling kind of threatened having this ex-boyfriend of hers, who happens to be his ex-best friend, showing up at this party and, making him look bad. So that's one of the things I really liked about this movie on a rewatch is just how well the characters are written. And the dialogue may at times come across as a little cheesy 80s, but at its essence, the characters I think are written really well. The relationships are written really well. And I think that was something that Kevin Tenney did a really good job with. And I like the actors that they had playing these characters. I thought Todd Allen did a really good job as Jim. He kind of played that blue collar guy really well. He's gone on to do several things. He's been in various movies, small roles in TV shows. I mean, the guy's been around in probably every show that was on in the 80s. He had a guest appearance role. Tawny Katane, she had already done Bachelor Party with Tom Hanks, but this really was kind of one of her first big quasi-starring roles. I mean, she wasn't the star. I think Todd Allen had top billing in this, but she was, very much a focal point in this movie, and I think probably one of her first big roles. At the time this movie was made, she wasn't even the girl from the Whitesnake videos. Now, by the time I saw the movie when it came out on VHS, probably later in '87, that's when Whitesnake's Here I Go Again, Is This Love, all those Still of the Night, all those videos were coming out, and Tawny Katane was featured on those. So by the time I saw this, I knew who Tawny Katane was just from seeing her sprawled out in a thong and a sheer white dress on David Coverdale's car. And she was not dating David Coverdale at the time they made Witchboard. She was actually dating O.J. Simpson. He was like newly married to Nicole Brown, God rest her soul. And already he was fucking around on her with Tawny Katane. And he would show up on the set and have to, give fake names because trying to keep this affair on the DL. But Tawny Katane, I can't say that she's well respected for her acting because, people are quick to see her as just that chick from the Whitesnake videos. And that's pretty much it. Beautiful face that shows her boobs. And I think that's unfair because while I haven't seen a ton of her work, Bachelor Party saw that, and Witchboard in and of itself, I think Witchboard really showed that she did a really good job acting. She played this sweet girlfriend who didn't swear much. When the progressive entrapment kind of starts with the Linda character, you see her make that transition where she's swearing more and she's getting angry and she's bothered by sleepless nights and things like that. And then when she makes the transition to when she is possessed by Malfader, she does a really good job with all that. It's all very believable, and it never comes across as cheesy or hokey. I mean, granted, is she Meryl Streep? No, but I think she did a really good job with the role of Linda and playing the different levels of what Linda is going through. Then, of course, you have Stephen Nichols, who plays the Brandon character, the former best friend of Jim. And Stephen Nichols, at the time, I don't know if when he made Witchboard, he was in Days of Our Lives, but I know when Witchboard finally came out, he had landed the role in Days of Our Lives as Patch. I happen to know this because when I was a kid and I'd stay home from school, my mom would watch Days of Our Lives, and I saw him, and he was cool. He was kind of wore the leather jacket, kind of a rock and roll type gruff guy, and wore a fucking eye patch. How cool is that? When you're a kid, if you're wearing an eye patch, you seem pretty badass to me. And so I really liked him. And then seeing him show up in this movie when I finally saw that was kind of cool as well. And I think Stephen Nichols, probably out of all the actors, probably one of the best actors in this, because I think he really does a great job with his character, which kind of has a bit of a character arc where at first he is this standoffish and kind of dickish, snooty upper crust guy, and he's always putting Jim down. But then you really see that he does care for Linda. And then when you see the relationship between Jim and Brandon as they have to work together, and you see that ice kind of finally melt between the two of them, and you see that relationship, that friendship kind of building its way back. It's very good, and I attribute a lot of that to the acting of Stephen Nichols because I think he does a fantastic job with this role in making you hate him to begin with and then making you realize, oh, he's not such a bad guy. And there again, that I think can be attributed to the writing of Kevin Tenney because he writes characters that have reasons for why they're doing and why they're acting the way they're acting. It's not just Brandon is a dickhead. He's a rich guy and he's a dickhead because he's rich. It's because he and Jim were formerly best friends and he felt like Jim stole Linda away from him. And he just, he doesn't want to be an asshole, but whenever he gets around Jim, he kind of, those old feelings for Linda show up and he's jealous and he just can't help but saying dickhead things. And there are a lot of really good scenes, especially when they go to Big Bear, where the two of them kind of talk about Linda and you really feel like they're hashing out their differences and you feel that relationship kind of build back up again, which gives this movie a lot more heart than you would expect, because there's the possession stuff. There's the Ouija board stuff, but really probably one of the most interesting aspects of the story is this friendship that was torn asunder because they let a woman come in between them, and then that woman, because of the situation she's in, kind of pulls them back together and rebuilds that friendship. And I think that is really what makes this movie actually really good in the long run, is the relationship between Jim and Brandon, and the actors Todd Allen and Stephen Nichols who play these two characters. I think did a good job with making you care about the friendship that wasn't there and started to show up again at the end. And I think they did a good job. Kevin Tenney did a really good job of slowly revealing that. At first, you see their relationship, and it's just Brandon's a dickhead. He's a rich guy. He's Linda's ex-boyfriend, and he doesn't like Jim because they're dating now, Linda and Jim. And then you realize that they were former friends, and they grew up together, and Linda, that relationship kind of tore them apart. And you slowly, incrementally get more reasons why this relationship was torn asunder, and which makes it all the more heartfelt when it starts to come back together. And that's probably one of the things I enjoyed most about this movie. Another thing I really loved about this movie was all the stuff with the Ouija board. And I like how this movie was originally supposed to be called Ouija, but I believe Parker Brothers has the rights to the name Ouija and a Ouija board, because they actually put out a Ouija board. My best friend had one of those Parker Brothers Ouija boards when we were growing up. And I remember us, after watching this, trying to use it in his bedroom one night when I was spending the weekend there. And, it was one of those things. No, you're moving it. No, you're moving it. And of course, we were both moving it. But at any rate, the original title of the movie was supposed to be Ouija, and because they didn't want to get sued and they had to refilm some stuff, because I think I at one point did use one of the Parker Brothers Ouija boards in the movie. I think it might have been in that scene where Brandon and Jim are in Big Bear. That's why they used a completely different looking board, like a green looking board. But they went with Witchboard, which is actually originally was going to be the term in the movie. When Brandon is at Jim and Linda's party and he's talking about a Ouija board and the different names, he does mention Witchboard. But that scene, or at least that part of the scene, ended up on the cutting room floor. So while originally the term Witchboard was in the movie, due to editing and due to that being cut, the actual term Witchboard is never actually uttered in the movie. But I think that it did a lot of really cool stuff with the Witchboard scenes. That original scene with Brandon and Linda at the party talking to what they think is David, and they find out it's not David, and the board flips off their knees and Brandon's tire pops was a really creepy scene. That scene at Big Bear with Brandon and Jim, and they're talking to David on that Ouija board they have. And that was probably one of the creepiest scenes when I originally saw this back in 87, was that scene where they're talking to David and they're finding out that it's not David that Linda's been talking to this whole time. It's been somebody else. And when they're asking, did you kill this person? Did you kill that person? Were you talking to us at the seance? And the answers are no, no, no. And when they keep asking where this Malfador is, and he spells out her, and they set up earlier that, they sometimes misspell things. And then when David respells it, it's Here, and here. I remember in 87 when I watched this, that was the creepiest scene. That reveal was so creepy. On rewatch, it wasn't as creepy, but it's still, maybe it's because I knew it was coming, but it was still kind of puts, so the hairs on the back of your neck on end. Another one of the creepiest scenes was probably one of the scarier scenes is when Linda has the Malfader dream where she's walking around and she turns around and there's Malfader with an axe and he cuts her head off. And while the special effects aren't that great for that, I mean, by today's standard where they do something CG or they'd have some prosthetic head and robotics and what have you, it's still pretty effective as a scare because the actor that plays Malfader, J.P. Lubson, plays Carlos Malfader, and he just has this look. I don't think he has any real lines in this, but he's a photographer, and he was signing on to this movie, thought he was going to be the first AD or the second AD. I think it might have been a second AD position, but they loved the look of him so much that they cast him in this Malfader role, and he just has this very severe look like that. Remember that beer commercial with the most interesting man in the world? You take him and you make him evil. That's what J.P. Lubson looks like as Carlos Malfader. They did like a forehead prosthetic to make him look even more sinister, but he looks creepy and looks scary. And while the special effect of him chopping Tawny Katane or Linda's head off isn't that great because they just had like a stunt woman with her head tucked down and they had like a styrofoam head on a pole with a Tawny Katane wig on it, and you see the shot from behind her and he swings that axe and lops it off. It's not a great special effect. It's a very simple special effect, but just the look of J.P. Lubson as Malfader just makes that scene so scary. And it's actually quite funny because once the head comes off, you see the stunt person's hands come up and kind of do jazz hands or something. Really kind of cheesy, but I like listening to the interviews of J.P. Lubson where he's talking about how, he's got this stunt woman with her head tucked down and he has to swing this axe at the styrofoam head. And Kevin Tenney's just telling him, harder, swing it faster, swing it harder. And he's like, I don't want to hurt this stunt person. And speaking of stunts, probably one of the best kills, I think, in this was probably one of the best stunts, I thought, as far as an all-around scene. Of course, you have the character Zarabeth, played by Kathleen Wilhoit, who you've probably seen her in tons of stuff because this was like one of our first few movies. And then she went on to do parts in various films and TV shows through the 80s and 90s, into the 2000s. I mean, Jesus, she's still doing stuff today. I think she most recently last year had a part on CSI Vegas. Not that I watched that, but she's been in that show Yellowstone. So she's still out there acting, and I wouldn't have guessed it by this character because I was not a big fan of the Zarabeth character. As a character, she just seemed a little over the top. She felt kind of like a cross between Spicoli meets Cyndi Lauper meets Janine from Ghostbusters, and was kind of like the stereotypical what a punk was thought to be in the 80s. The character felt more like a caricature. All she needed was a colored mohawk. Instead, she had this colored Cyndi Lauper style hairdo. But the character was just kind of over the top and very radical dude. It sounded like one of the Ninja Turtles that would have come along later in the decade. And while I didn't really care for the character, I thought the actress did a really good job with the character. I thought she played the character quite well, as I'm sure it was written. But this character got one of the best deaths when she has that seance, which was actually one of the creepier scenes as well, when she's kind of channeling the voice of who you think is David. We find out later it's Malfader. That's creepy. But then when she goes back to her apartment and she's being chased by the spirit of Malfader and is slashed across the neck with the hatchet, which I was never really 100% sure about the hatchet thing. What is that? Is she seeing the hatchet just floating in the air? Is she seeing a manifestation, a spiritual manifestation holding the hatchet? I wasn't quite sure how that works because you never really see what's going on. It's usually a POV shot from the spirit or a shot from a reaction shot of the person. And of course, she gets slashed on the throat with the hatchet and then thrown out the window. And she's impaled on this sundial that's sticking out of her back. And one of the coolest kills. I really like that. That and the Brandon kill I thought was really good, getting the hatchet in the head. It wasn't overly gory, but there was just enough gore there that really sated the appetite if you wanted to see some blood in this movie. And I think one of the other really scary scenes that you get with this movie is the scene at the end where Jim, he's left Big Bear, he's come back, he's trying to rescue Linda, and she is fully possessed by Malfador, and she's kind of dressed up in the suit jacket, and she's got the little fedora on, kind of looking like what Malfador looked like, and she's attacking Jim, although, she's swinging this axe at him, but like it almost looks like purposely trying to miss him, and I understand that you don't want to hit your lead actor with an axe, but some of the axe swings were like, well, that was obviously not trying to hit. But at any rate, that whole scene was good. The fight between Linda and Jim was good in that. It felt real, It felt like Jim didn't want to hurt her, but he's fighting off this spirit. So I really enjoyed that scene. It had some creepiness where you have Linda, and again, it goes to Tawny Kitane's acting job in this, does a really convincing vocalization of herself being possessed by Malfador. It really, in the facial expressions, you really feel like this isn't Linda anymore. And then you get the big reveal that Linda isn't the portal, that Jim is the portal. That I don't know if that it still sits well with me. I get it that Jim was opened up more and more to the spirit world as the thing went along, but it never really played out well. As you couldn't tell if Malfador is just telling Jim this to get him to commit suicide, or if it's legit. It just seemed a little too ambiguous for the big reveal that it's supposed to be. And then you have Jim contemplating killing himself if he is the portal. To close the portal saves Linda, and he's gonna kill himself, but then he doesn't, and then he ends up shooting the Witchboard. In the only real bit of CG. I mean, it wasn't CG like we know it today, but they did use some special visual effects to have the Witchboard, the Ouija board flying in air, and he's shooting it, and then to defeat the ghost, you just shoot the spirit board. And that to me, I didn't care for that. The scene of him falling out the window, very Hitchcock-esque. That scene where he's falling out the window, he's kind of supported on a crane. It's in slow motion. He's slowly falling down. You don't really see the impact of him hitting the car, but you see the aftermath of that where you think, well, maybe he did die, but no, he didn't. He's just got a neck brace as they're getting married. I didn't care for that either. I did like the shot of him falling. Like I said, it felt very much like a Hitchcock film. And I know Kevin Tenney, very inspired by things like Hitchcock, very inspired by The Exorcist with this movie. I don't know for certain, but you have to wonder if Linda being named Linda is an homage to Linda Blair playing the Reagan character, the one who was possessed in The Exorcist. I almost think it would have been a more complicated ending, a more bittersweet ending if Jim had to kill himself to save Linda. That's a very tragic ending. I know it's probably a little more tragic than moviegoers today would want to see, although I think we're a little more open to that than we were back in 1986, 1987. But that, to me, would have been a more interesting ending. And I would have liked an ending better than just you shoot the Ouija board and the ghost no longer has... the ghost has no power here. And then that creepy jump scare ending with the Witchboard where the landlady, Miss Moses, played by the incomparable Rosemary, of course, what was she in the Mary Tyler Moore Show or the Dick Van Dyke Show, one of those shows. She's with her granddaughter, they're cleaning up the place, and one of them asks if the Witchboard will still work. No, not with all those holes. And then all of a sudden the planchette by itself moves to yes. And you get that little bit of a jump scare ending. I kind of like that. Now, that's one of the things I liked and didn't like about this movie. There were a lot of jump scares in this movie. There were some cheap jump scares where... and it's not even a just the camera pans around and there's Jim standing there. It is Jim sneaking up behind Linda and her turning around and seeing him. You know he's there, but she sees him and then she jumps, and that kind of makes you jump as well. I counted 4. There may have been 5, but I remember 4 of them there. Those kind of jump scares, they're funny, but I don't know. I could kind of do without those. Then there are some jump scares with the planchette on the Witchboard moving by itself. There are some other jump scares with hatchets flying and knives flying. The one knife scene where Linda's in the kitchen, the knife flings to the floor, and then the bottle of ketchup pours on it. That was kind of creepy. And actually something that Kevin Tenney, when he's doing the research about this, that is actually based off an account from somebody that had problems with a Ouija board. In the story that he recounts, the ketchup bottle falls, ketchup forms a silhouette of a body, and the knife falls in it, essentially stabbing it in the chest. He did that backwards, where the white knife hits the floor first and the ketchup bottle runs down that and kind of makes what looks like blood. And a lot of the things that happen in this movie in regards to the Ouija board are based off of either Kevin Tenney's experience or experience of people he knows who have had experiences with Ouija boards. The tires blowing out on Brandon's car, the thing with the knife, stuff like that, which I think, while this is a horror movie, it's not real. The fact that you know that some of these things that you just saw are allegedly happened to real people, that kind of adds a bit of mystique to it and a bit of creepiness to it. And I don't know if he intended it, but Kevin Tenney, it felt like there were several lines ripped off from Star Wars in this. I can't count how many times you had the "I love you, I know" scene. Linda would say "I love you," Jim would say "I know," and I know that is to kind of instill the fact that you don't even know if Jim really loves her. And that is another point of contention between Jim and Brandon. It's more complicated than that, but the fact that they essentially use the exact lines from Star Wars. And they also use, I believe Jim says it, maybe Jim or Brandon, one of the two. I've got a bad feeling about this. I was like, Jesus Christ, is Han Solo going to show up next? I was hoping I could have played a game, pick the Star Wars lines. It would have been, I think it would have been funny if Kevin Tenney just used various random Star Wars lines throughout this movie, and you could make a drinking game out of it. You can't do that because they only do it a couple times, but you can't make a drinking game out of the cheap Jim jump scares that they do. So ultimately, I really like this movie in hindsight. When I watched it originally in 87 on VHS tape, it scared the shit out of me as a kid. I was very frightened when my best friend and I were using the Ouija board in his bedroom one night. We had the lights out and just had like a candle or a flashlight or something. And we had to stop it because we both were scared shitless because we were afraid of what was going to happen because we watched this movie. I played this movie for a group of my friends in probably the mid-90s when I was in college. And I was telling them about how scary this movie is. And then we watched it and nobody thought it was scary at all. And even I was like, oh, this isn't as scary as I remember it being. And it was kind of a letdown. For a long time, I was like, yeah, Witchboard's good, but it's not as good as I used to think it was. And then I watched it again here recently, just the last weekend. And it's held up as far as the creepiness. And while the scares aren't as good as they could have been, I think I appreciate now more the things. I don't remember the friendship between Jim and Brandon as much as I did when I was a kid. I was more focused on the Witchboard and Tawny Katane, seeing her naked. I mean, what the hell? A 12-year-old me, that's the kind of shit I was into. Supernatural stuff and boobs. But now watching it as an adult, and I see that relationship between Jim and Brandon and how it was torn apart and brought back together. That to me is an interesting aspect of this that I didn't appreciate as much back then when it first came out. And there are still some legit scares. There are some really legit creepy moments. Kevin Tenney did a really good job of building tension, especially in some of those scenes with the Witchboard, which really was kind of a character unto itself. And there's some things you may not notice about that Witchboard. If you look closely, when they're using it and everything's nice and fine, and Linda's talking to who she thinks is David, and learning that she knows where her ring she lost is, and David's telling her that, she's pregnant, and all of the characters on the Ouija board, the sun and moon have happy faces. There's a little cherub like angel and things on there. But then when things start getting sinister and the spirit talking to Linda is more malevolent, you see the angry faces on the sun and the moon, and you see the little cherub's angel wings replaced with almost like demonic bat wings, and it's really creepy. When you first realize that, it kind of scares the shit out of you. And it's little touches like that just give this movie a creep factor and an uneasiness about it. Like I said, Kevin Tenney did a really good job with building tension with those Witchboard scenes. And I thought the cinematography was really good. Like I said, there were some shots that were very much reminiscent of Hitchcock. There were other shots that it felt much like The Exorcist. And the shots they did kind of like from the spirit vision, where the camera's on a crane kind of floating through space, and it spins around and looks at the Witchboard and then goes into Linda's bedroom, and it's shots like that. The shot with Zarabeth when the spirit is chasing her and that the camera's kind of floating through space were some really cool shots. They did a lot of good crane work in this movie, kind of lending itself to the Hitchcock influence. And the cinematographer on this, Roy H. Wagner, he went straight from this to being the cinematographer on probably one of my favorite horror films of all time, especially my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street, other than the original Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. He was the cinematographer on that. And he's done a lot of non-horror stuff as well, but as far as horror goes, Witchboard, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, those are some, top-notch horror films as far as I'm concerned. And you get a lot of great shots. The graveyard scene with Brandon and Jim, I think, is really creepy and atmospheric and eerie. And that's a lot to do with Roy Wagner's cinematography. And the house is really interesting in this old Victorian mansion that they turned into an apartment complex. It mirrors the fact that when Kevin Tenney wrote this, I believe he was actually living in an apartment that was created in this old Victorian mansion. And that house has actually been in quite a few movies. It was in Waxworks in 88, that movie Willard in 71, also Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. It was featured in that. So that house, has some Hollywood horror bona fides itself, and it really, you got that. I think that's probably one of the things that made the atmosphere so creepy, is just this old Victorian house. And when they make the connection between them living there as an apartment building and the fact that that was Mal Fader's home, once upon a time when he was still with the living, was a creepy little reveal. So Witchboard, to me, looking at it from the lens of how I originally saw it back in the 80s and seeing it now, it's like watching two different movies for me. I enjoyed it as a kid because of the horror and the supernatural and the creepiness and the scares. While I don't find the scares as scary as I did back then, I still find the movie creepy, and I like it for other reasons. Like I said, the characters and the relationships of those characters, I think, mean a little more to me now as an adult. I think just add another dimension to this movie. You still get the creepiness. You still get the atmosphere. You still get the tension, which for a first-time director and screenplay writer of Kevin Tenney, for him to be able to do that, like I said, he seemed like he was going to be an up-and-coming bigwig in the world of horror. And it's a shame we haven't seen anything from him in a long time now. But for him to pull off what he did with $1 million budget that made, 7-8 times over at the box office, I think is a great feat for a first-time, screenplay writer and director. And he really pulled off some good scares for the budget. And like I said, build a lot of atmosphere, a lot of things to be creep you out. And that still works today. Maybe some of the special effects aren't as special as they seemed back in 1986, 87. But even by today's standards, it's still not bad. I'd much rather see okay practical effects than shitty CG any day. The movie may not hold up as far as, this very much feels and looks like an 80s movie, from the dress and the way people talked and stuff like that. But hell, that's my era. That's when I was growing up, and I don't see a damn thing wrong with that. So I can look past that. But the cast was really good, with standouts like Stephen Nichols and Tawny Katane. Really solid efforts from Todd Allen and Kathleen Mulhoit, a creepy bad guy like J.P. Lubson, and a really interesting story that I think the story holds up as well as anything today. Would I like to see a remake of this? Maybe. I don't know. I think an updated version of it, if they still went with practical effects and not just like a bunch of shitty CG, I think it'd be interesting to see this movie done in a more modern way, but I don't need that. I'm perfectly fine with Witchboard being what it is. And now that I've watched it again and have rekindled an affection for the movie, it's probably something I'm going to try watching, once every couple years, and just to enjoy this refound adoration for a movie that I loved as a kid. In my 20s, was kind of ambivalent about, and now I've watched it pushing 50. I really enjoyed Witchboard, and I know it's got a cult following, so I know there's a lot of you out there that love this movie too. And if you don't, give it another watch. You might find that you enjoy it a little more now than you did back when you originally watched it. So there you have it. That is a Be Kind Rewind look at Witchboard here on Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe. Check us out on Facebook. We're always posting trailers to TV shows and movies. We're always posting articles I find all over the internet. I like to add my 2 cents. We're going to have a new episode coming up on Monday. The new Dungeons and Dragons movie is coming out, so we're going to be talking about that as well as some other things. I believe The Bad Batch is wrapping up their 2nd season on Disney Plus, so we'll probably be talking about that as well as other things on next week's episodes. So find out more about that on our Facebook page, as well as checking us out on Instagram. And no matter where you listen to this podcast, please follow it, subscribe to it, like it, whatever you got to do. Share it with your friends and neighbors and loved ones, family members, grandma. She's an old horror fan from back in the day. Share it with anyone that loves horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Help us get the word out and build our numbers up, and so we can keep doing this. And no matter what you do, please leave a review. 5 stars will be awesome, but whatever review you leave, we do appreciate that. So until next time. Thank you for visiting Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe. We hope that you found something to your liking and visit the shop again soon. But even though you may come back, you never really get to leave Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe.